Hey friends, welcome back to the Holistic Health Podcast. Fun questions coming at you as per usual at the moment anyway. Who knows if any can we get some feedback please from you that you're either enjoying these and playing along or you would rather us just get straight into the episode. To be completely fair, I'm really enjoying them, so I may or may not take your feedback on board, but I'm still curious. So, kicking it off with question number one. What's one thing people would be surprised to learn about you, and maybe one thing that you think people would be surprised to learn about me, as in what if you can think of one of each?
Okay. Gosh, it's hard to even narrow it down because I've got some pretty random facts. You know what, when you first posed that question, I don't know if I've spoken about this on the podcast about my wrestling days. Do you think I've spoken about that on the podcast?
I feel like you have, but maybe a long time ago,
Oh,
so
okay.
please tell us.
Okay. So back in the day when I was young and really fit, I was doing a lot of martial arts. So started off doing Thai kickboxing and moved to Chinese kickboxing, and I loved it so much that I wanted to just get more, I don't know, martial arts stuff. And somehow I ended up at a women's sports fighting gym where it's like if anyone here is old enough to know, if not, you might have to Google it, but WWF wrestling.
Oh my God. Are you ready? Let's get ready to rumble. That's all I remember from it.
You got it, nailed it. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So I joined a women's sports fighting gym where we learnt how to do that, except for realsies. So actually WWF, as well, I hope I'm not bursting anyone's fantasy here, but it's all scripted and it's like fake in the sense that the moves are very calculated. They actually don't hurt you at all. But the sports fighting part was very real. But we did have a road show where we all had characters.
This is still what you're saved in Bowen's phone as, by the way.
Oh, really?
I'm pretty sure.
That's so funny. My in-ring persona or character was Ice Angel. And I didn't come up with this, I'm pretty sure. I think how it came about was, and it's probably still true for me today, when I get really serious, I get very deadpan in the face, like really like, it's like I don't have enough brain. I've so many brain cells focusing on what I'm doing that I don't have expressions on my face anymore. So I was called Ice Angel, and I remember there was a few girls. I had a flatmate. Actually, she's quite a famous personal trainer now in Sydney. I'm not going to name her because this might be part of her past she doesn't want anyone to know about. But she's a Kiwi. Well, I'm probably giving it away. She's a Kiwi. Someone might be able to work it out. And she was my flatmate, and that's how I got into it. And there was another girl, she was called Pandora, and she'd be brought out in a box or come out of Pandora's box. I mean, lol, it was the early 2000s. It was cool. And there
Oh
was
my
another
God.
girl, there was a girl, she was built like a brick shithouse. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. She was 6 feet tall and she was so muscly, and her name was Tank. Anyway,
Appropriate by the sounds of it.
yeah. The coolest thing I learned there was to actually be able to pick. I should try this with you, Nat, maybe for our next photo shoot. To actually, I know how to pick someone up and put them on my shoulders without bulging a disc.
You're,
Um,
you're really pushing the friendship.
I know, sorry, that sounds really threatening, doesn't it? I promise I won't hurt you. So yeah, I feel like people would be surprised to know that because I don't know, just naturopathy and like wrestling professionally doesn't
It's not
exactly.
really go. I also don't feel like you give off wrestling vibes
No.
like anymore. I didn't know you back then, so maybe you did back then, but and
No.
I don't mean that in a good or a bad way. I just
Yeah.
mean generally speaking, you're a
Mhm.
very warm, like
Yeah.
sophisticated looking human, and it does not look like you'd go Super Saiyan Ray, rogue on us and,
Yeah, yeah.
get us with a scissor kick.
I mean, that was actually one of my signature moves, was actually like a scissor kick around the neck, and then I would pull my opponent down onto the ring. Anyway, I'm not trying to scare anybody, and it was very professional, but there is actually, particularly when I was younger, maybe there was a lot of repressed rage. I don't know. I really liked aggressive physical sport. And something else, which may be part of why you said that, is I absolutely love to be underestimated. There's so much people don't know about me. And I'm really happy because, yeah, it's nice to take people by surprise from
If in
that.
case you ever need to scissor kick someone,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
they
I
won't
mean,
know it's coming.
I don't know how good I'd be now. But anyway, hopefully muscle memory would serve me well if we get jumped in a dark alley. Well, I guess we'll hopefully never have to find out.
That we're never out past dark, so
Yeah, it's not going to happen, is it?
no, probably
So,
not.
all right. Well, so something about you, or do you want to say something about me? What do you think?
Well, Jesus, how do I top that? I
Oh,
can't. That is
no.
absolutely very surprising about you. Well, I already knew it, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that people, if they haven't heard that, are like,
Yeah.
are we listening to the right
Yeah.
podcast? You
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Be careful, but you are. You've been warned. Um, I'm going to go with something a little bit more less specific, more general, and a bit more lighthearted.
Mm.
I actually think that maybe this podcast, like having you on this podcast, and I think your journey with podcasting together has brought this out a lot more.
Mm.
But you are like so funny.
Mm.
As in, I think when people first meet you, that their impression is that you're very, professional, sophisticated, like serious even.
Mm.
And I don't think that, yes, you can be those things, but I also think that there's like you have some of the funniest things to say and are quick-witted and just like so opposite to that at times in the best way,
Yeah.
and it's something that I really enjoyed when I started getting to know you
Mm.
was like, oh wow, like she's like so much cheekier and funnier than I
Mm.
initially expected. So
Mm.
that's definitely a nice surprise. I could say that surprise might be how many times you've shat your pants, but I feel like everyone that's a loyal listener is like, well, we're not surprised
Yeah, yeah,
anymore, so
yeah. All of our
move right
friends
along.
know. So yeah, yeah, old news.
Yeah.
What about you, darling? What's something our friends wouldn't know about you?
Well, that's hard, isn't it? Because I feel like I've shared a lot of my past already, and also not everything, of course. And then some of the things that I can think of are probably not that surprising.
Mm.
Maybe the first, like, surface one that comes to mind is that I'm actually quite, like, unpleasant to be around when I'm angry or grumpy. Like I feel
Mm.
like my emotional state in that sense is quite jarring to
Mm.
people, and probably because it's not generally how I exist, and I'm a very like warm,
Mm.
joyful, playful type person. So that's probably the contrast
Mm.
that shocks people.
Mm.
So I'd probably say that in terms of actual like random factoids that are along the threads of what you were talking about is I actually think, and I don't say this to toot my own horn, like legitimately, I could have had a career as a professional cricket player, but I chose not to because I didn't love the sport enough.
Mm.
But I was really good at it, and I was coming up in the sport at a time when like women were starting, like were only kind of starting a little bit more out in it. And so some of the Australian cricketers now are people that I played with when I was younger. But I'm
Mm.
really glad I didn't become that because I honestly, I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. And I feel like you really have to love it to play cricket.
Mm.
Anyway, that's probably my random factoid about myself.
I love.
What's something that you think people would be surprised to learn about me?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm surprised to hear about your alter cricket ego.
Yeah, I didn't have a field name, sorry.
Oh, shame. I mean, we could come up with one for you if you like.
No, no, that's fine. We'll just stick with yours being the highlight.
Lucky for us, you chose natural medicine. But just going back to what you were saying about your personality, your like spice to size ratio is like how I don't what's the word?
I don't
I
know.
don't even
Out
have
of
a word.
proportion.
Yes, extraordinarily disproportionate. So it's hard to tell online unless you look at photos of Nat and I beside each other. You don't know what a Polly Pocket she is. She's a tiny human. And of course, a bit like my professional persona, like Nat has her game face on, online and is a warm, incredible, amazing, smart, funny human. But the little spice factor you've got, and I'm not just referring to like if you're upset or angry, but that's kind of
Yeah.
bottled up in there too. But yeah, sense of humor, cheekiness, like boldness, protectiveness. It's actually very deceptive because, like, if I didn't know you, I would think you're this, small, soft, marshmallowy human, smart human, but like not particularly threatening in any way. And actually, I think Ice Angel would be quite petrified to run into you in a dark alley on a bad day.
We make quite the duo, don't we?
Ooh, yeah, it's so fun, and I think it's kind of nice. Actually, I'm sure most people can relate. They've got their, their work personality, and then there's the rest of the stuff that kind of gets to come out on weekends. But yeah, there's a little bit of insight into ours.
I love it. All right, let's do two other quick fire ones. Hopefully, quick fire. What's your guilty pleasure, like, or a guilty pleasure TV show or a movie that you can think of?
I haven't had a lot of time for screens in recent adult years, but when I had a little bit more wiggle room, guilty pleasure movies were Grease and Dirty Dancing. I mean, Patrick Swayze, swoon, and
Love.
a little bit older. That were my favorite movies as a teenager, and then definitely like still really love them. But there was a TV show that I watched. It was so trashy. I think it was called Flipping Out. It was a US show. Jeff Lewis is like, it was a renovating, like they would flip houses and make money. And Jeff Lewis was like a gay, flamboyant interior designer. And he was just absolutely loose and out of control, like an actual menace to society, just about. And he had a really funny assistant who reminded me of Eileen off Seinfeld. And
Oh,
like, I love, watching like makeover shows or flipping like renovating shows, like that's so fun to me, but I was really in it for just the drama. It was great.
I love it. Well, my guilty pleasure TV show is Farmer Wants a Wife.
Oh,
I
of
just
course it
really
is.
just love love. Guys, I
Romantic.
really just love love. And I really like seeing the farms and the farm life
Hmm.
and seeing the family dynamics when they get to meet the family and just I just love, and it's so sweet if people actually like you get to watch people falling in love and it's
Yeah.
just so just lights my little heart up. So I've watched a lot of seasons of Farmer Wants a Wife and I'm not even mad about it.
That's
So
so
that's
lovely.
mine. And final question before we get into the topic for today is what's one challenge, and one, I know there's many because we're humans. What's
Mhm.
one challenge or experience that you feel like shaped who you are today?
Okay, God, there are thousands, but I think the first one that just popped into my mind then was actually moving so much as a kid. I probably
Mm.
haven't shared this on the podcast before, but my dad was in the military, so I was an army brat. And we moved 22 times in my first 21 years of life, and I went to 13 different schools. And, there's pros and cons to everything that happens to you in life. And one of the, I guess, the positive outcomes of that experience was I feel like I'm incredibly adaptable. You could put me in any room and I could talk to anyone about anything and kind of, adjust myself to the environment and feel comfortable being thrown into new environments and meeting new people. I was ensconced
Mm.
in many different cultures and demographics and, just literally such a rich and broad and diverse sense of experiences. And I think that has really served me well in adulthood, being really comfortable with maybe even instability, but also just, yeah, there's not really anywhere I walk into that I will feel wobbly, because I've had to kind of start over so many times and, new conversations with people that don't know me.
That's, yeah, that would have been really, I can exactly hear what you mean. Like, there's a silver lining to it, but it would have been a really hard experience to not be able to really create a long-term sense of belonging when you're growing up, when at a time when all you want to do is belong. So, yeah, I think that's really interesting. I feel like, again, it's so hard to choose one, isn't it? Because I can think of several where I'm like, yeah, I would be a different person if I didn't have that experience. But I'm going to choose one that I feel like might be like slightly relevant to health and stuff. I would say that the experience of overcoming a 10-year long eating disorder. I like having it, overcoming it, and also all of like the really horrible 9 to 12 month period that I went through off the back of that, which I have shared before on the podcast. I think it really did shape who I am and what I'm doing now career wise, and also just my relationship with myself, with food, with other people and their struggles. Like, I think it was really challenging, but I do think that it has made me, I don't know if a better person is the right term, but because, who knows, maybe I would have gotten there anyway, but I think it's definitely built a resilience in me and a relationship with myself that I think I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, or maybe I would have, but in through a different lens.
Yes, I mean that type of experience is such a like deep DNA deep transformational journey to go on, and one that is so emotional and energetic as much as it is physical. And I know that like everything you went through just means as a practitioner you're so aware and so empowering for patients as well. And I think it's very rare that there is a woman who hasn't had or been touched or impacted by social programming and misinformation, or around food. I think all of us can relate to it to one degree or another, and it can be really difficult. And I mean, this really is the perfect segue into the episode, but thank goodness that you came through that and you've taken everything that you've learned and you're bringing it to the table every day in your clinic, but also specifically for our conversation right now.
Mm, yeah, I agree. It's you're welcome.
Yes,
It's
yes,
not been
thank
easy.
you. Well, yeah, without further ado, then, we wanted to put this episode together, I guess, really as a reflection of like every person we see in clinic, we ask how they're eating, right? We're looking at dietary habits of every human that comes through our clinic doors, and we can tell a lot about what people are, how they're eating, what they're eating, about what's going on. We can see gaps and things in their nutrition, but we can also spot habits that may be indicative of a relationship with food that is less than ideal. Now, relationship with food, of course, is also very personal. And so this isn't, we're not promoting a one size fits all at all, but what we do both acknowledge and recognize is that for many people, their relationship with food is quite complex, and the journey to return from beliefs, mindsets, and habits that are not serving you, but you're finding tricky to break free from can be really difficult. So we hope this conversation is going to be helpful. And where we might start is I'm curious to hear your reflections, Nat, actually, on where fear around food actually can come from. Obviously, we've talked about social programming or touched on that, but you can dive a bit deeper into that. But it's certainly not just that either, is it?
No, and this is not an exhaustive list, and this is my opinion rather than trawling through all of the science of whatever's been done in this space. And look, I think that there's a few areas that come to mind for me. Like definitely culturally, like diet culture is a really massive thing. And diet culture, regardless of whether the goal is like diet culture in the sense of like weight loss or fat loss, diet culture in the sense of like clean eating or moral kind of diet culture around like vegan or ancestral or whatever it might be. So I do think there's that, because there's very in those spaces there's often really strong languaging and a lot of strong messaging that's very yes no black white around what is good, like, and I'm using that word intentionally, what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong, what is having you be part of the collective who are in that group and what is making you not fit into that group of belonging. So I think that's part of it. I also see a lot where people have had a medical diagnosis of some sort and been recommended to eat a certain way by maybe one person, maybe a couple of people, and it then gets really ingrained in them that they must eat this way forever, and what that person has originally said is absolutely true and will be forever. And I think, like, I mean, an example of that that comes to mind is, let's say someone gets diagnosed with IBS and they're told you need to go on a low FODMAP diet, and then into the future, even if they happen to work with someone and resolve their IBS, which by the way is very possible, I often notice that there's still a lot of either conscious or subconscious avoidance around FODMAP foods, or that, you know, these foods are bad for me because I have IBS and these foods are good for me. A similar thing can happen in something like, you know, going through PCOS and someone's being told that they must avoid, you know, all carbs are bad or fruit is sugar, or there's so many examples, you know, that we can give. So I think that's another one that really can ring true in the sense that it's something that had been really heavily ingrained in you at one part of your life and perhaps even worked really well for you. That's the other thing. I think people can have experiences with certain ways of eating, whether that's, you know, avoiding a certain food or including a certain food or eating a certain way. And it's very hard, I notice, for people to embrace or accept that it may not be something that they have to do forever. And so I definitely think that can carry on. And then, you know, I certainly think, you know, our friends, our family, how we've grown up to be conditioned around food also comes into play for sure. I don't think that that's uncommon too. And then I think outside of that, sometimes food fears, I don't know if this is the right terminology, but I do see that sometimes that fearfulness that can come around eating is when someone has been used to using food as a way to control things and therefore feel secure and safe because there's some kind of certainty and like clear lines, and there's a soothing to their nervous system that happens when they feel like they're following a set of rules completely and they know where to color in the lines, you know. And I think that sometimes food fear can purely come for people when there's uncertainty for them around what should they be doing, because they don't either, maybe they are used to having someone that they're working with telling them what to do all the time, or maybe they were used to eating and being really confident with following a certain way of eating, and then something strongly comes in to challenge that notion, and it can bring up a lot of anxiety of then feeling like, oh, maybe I'm not doing it right now. So there's so many layers to it, truly, and I'm sure that there's more that I'm not mentioning, but those are the ones that first come to mind for me. But I do think regardless of where the food fear comes from, there's certainly some initial steps that can help. What do you feel like would be, or in your experience, I guess, witnessing people in clinic or whatnot on that journey, what do you feel like is a helpful first step, or even just a helpful step, full stop?
I think one thing, and this is probably true well outside of food, I think this is true everywhere in life actually, is to be constantly checking in with yourself about, what you're doing, why, and is it still right for you, or is it even really true? I remember hearing a quote that said, "Don't believe everything you think." And I think it's really very apt to use that here. And when you just bringing awareness, first of all, solving any kind of problem or challenge begins with bringing more awareness to it, and even just identifying, what are your dietary habits and what are you avoiding, and for what reason. So maybe doing a bit of an audit, if you like, a bit of a food journal, of both, maybe what you're eating, start making notes of what you avoid, because as Nat said, you might have been told 5 years ago or longer to avoid FODMAPs, and perhaps your IBS is resolved, but you are just automatically, you're on autopilot now and constantly scanning, cafe menus for low FODMAP options, or buying things that are labeled low FODMAP. So just becoming aware of your habits and choices, and also the commentary around it. So if you, again, eating out's probably a better example, because then we're faced with, so many choices, right? And we might make choices from any number of places, but listen to what that voice in your head is saying. And if it's, oh, I can't have that because that's bad, or that's too high in fat, or that's too high in sugar, or it's whatever, insert here. And I'm not saying that your commentary is wrong or right, okay? This is really about bringing awareness to, A, you have internal commentary around it, and B, what is that? Actually really getting clear on those thoughts rather than allowing them to kind of just run the show under the surface unexamined. And then once you've kind of got those out, some of them might be really obvious, and you're really aware of. There might be others over the course of, say, a week. You're like, oh, that's interesting. I've been just subconsciously avoiding this, or judging that, or whatever the case may be. And then really, ideally, I would do this with a practitioner, because I think, we live in an age of information, which is both a blessing and a curse. And it's really about, how does this information apply to you, and also your current health challenges, and also like, what are your current health challenges, what you think they are as well. I'm sure you've seen this too, Nat. People have come thinking they've got one thing, and you dig a bit deeper and it's actually something different, and they're trying to treat a condition they didn't even have really, or they were just a bit off the mark. So awareness is really important, but then examining if your beliefs are really true. And this can look any number of ways. For someone who maybe, as you mentioned, that example of having PCOS, if it was insulin-driven PCOS and you're trying to correct hyperinsulinemia, you are going to be mindful of how much sugar is in something, what the glycemic index is, and you might have to modify how you eat as a therapeutic intervention for a period of time. But that doesn't mean that's the way you need to eat long term. Same with FODMAPs and IBS. A good example of what I deal in my clinic a lot is with mold patients. There's actually a few different dietary, I don't want to call them recommendations, but strategies that might be used. Number one is low histamine diet. Often people have elevated histamine symptoms, levels, MCAS and especially MCAS. And also if they're a SIRS patient with high C4A and low VEGF, we'll often put them on a low amylose diet, which is a particular kind of starch, or they might be on a low mold diet, or possibly all three. And if you've been someone who's dealt with, let's stick with, say, MCAS or histamine, and you're on a low histamine diet, you might continue to have fairly restricted diet, trying to avoid dietary histamines or things that might trigger histamine release long after that becomes necessary for you anymore. And it becomes a source of stress. It becomes, your restrictions end up limiting micronutrient status and also just joy in life. And yeah, there's just so much around that. I know when I was a teenager. I think I shared this on a recent podcast of ours. I was a teenager in the 90s, and of course, calories and fat, like fat was demonized. And I was eating rice cakes because there was no fat in those. But of course, they were entirely refined carbohydrates with no nutrients whatsoever in them. That was totally the wrong thing to do. And I don't know if that really set me up for the PCOS I developed, or it was just part of the messy picture. But, you know, people were eating strictly low fat or strictly low carb, or, you know, there's just so many elements around dietary beliefs. Same with, you know, there's many reasons someone might choose to be vegan, and I absolutely love and adore animals, and I totally appreciate why someone wouldn't want to consume animal food or animal protein. And also, I notice that there is this belief that becomes situated in those who follow a vegan diet. They think that their diet is harm-free. And actually, when you look at it, the actual literature shows so many more lives are lost, smaller animals, but so many more lives are lost in almond farming and avocado harvesting. And you know, there is death everywhere and loss of life everywhere in the food chain, regardless of what you do or don't eat. And so, you know, if your diet is starting to cause you physical harm and you're doggedly sticking to it and essentially inflicting self-harm because of this belief you adopted, and that is it is a death-free way to eat, like that's just a classic example of a belief that needs serious re-examining, because that simply isn't the truth. So, you know, and maybe some more relatable options are people who are afraid of sugar, who then start avoiding fruit when they are just two completely different things all together. You know, maybe it's dairy. There's just so many things that we can get unconsciously programmed, or we might read one thing and just decide that it's gospel, or we might just go down one path because it was necessary at the time and now it's unnecessary, and it's time to reshape your mindset around it. So definitely bringing that awareness, tracking what you're doing. If you feel uncomfortable tracking your food, that's also an indication that you need some professional support if you're finding that's upsetting you or making you feel more anxious. But if you're comfortable doing that, you can absolutely begin to see your habitual choices might be telling a story about what's going on in your mind. And at that point, you can have actually a really constructive conversation with a professional around whether this is actually true anymore for you, if it's the best path for you, or not. And I guess on that note, Nat, what do you think about getting support for that kind of challenge?
Yeah, get it, go. Yeah,
Immediately.
I think this comes in two ways. So through the lens of our work, I think that, as you already mentioned before, if you're really overwhelmed about how you, and look, if you're listening to this episode, maybe you are, if you're really overwhelmed with, well, who bloody is right? Like, am I supposed to eat this way? Am I supposed to eat that way? This person has said this person has said that, you know, something, you know, it just, there's so much noise in this space. And it's very hard, I would say, to educate in a general sense on food and nutrition, because while there are foundational principles, there's a lot of nuance to it, and it just doesn't lend itself very well to like broad messaging in the sense that how social media, for example, is consumed. So I definitely think if where you're at is you're just in that paralysis by analysis, I just don't know even what I should be doing, and therefore everything I do or every choice I make, I'm questioning whether this is right or this is wrong. And it's starting to feel quite overwhelming or unsettling. And I think that can show behaviorally in a few different ways. For some people, it'll lead to just not eating very much at all because they just don't want to do the wrong thing. For other people, it'll lead into that place of like overwhelm and then kind of using like overeating or over consuming foods because you're like, well, fuck it, I don't know what's right, so I'm just going to eat everything and just ignore the problem because it's just too overwhelming. Um, so I think definitely like that's helpful just to get some clarity. And I do think you should be discerning where you go and seek that clarity. And I don't necessarily think that, a dietitian is better than a nutritionist or a naturopath is better than a nutritionist or vice versa. I just think you need to be discerning, like suss people out beforehand, get word of mouth referrals, like listen to people speak and look for language that is non dogmatic, that says there's nuance, that is not black and white. I think a red flag for me is when a practitioner is very certain that something is for everyone, or something is for no one, because that to me just says that there's a lot of either bias or oversimplification in a decision, aka what to nourish yourself with, that is actually very layered, even beyond physically what is going to work best in someone's body.
Oh,
So I think that's important. I also do think that depending on the degree of fear, anxiety that you have around food, definitely getting some form of therapy support is also beneficial. And there's heaps of modalities out there. Again, I don't necessarily think it's my place to say that which one is right, because I think everyone resonates with different types of therapy and different practitioners. But I do think that it it often is a really helpful thing, because I would say in my personal and clinical experience that there is almost always a non-food related driver behind being very susceptible to feeling very overwhelmed and anxious around food and your relationship with food, that can be really supportive to actually look at and start to address. So I think those two things work quite nicely together. But start wherever feels like it resonates with you most. And I think that's all you can really do. And you do have to do something though. Like, these problems don't go away; they'll just find a different area to focus on. So I think if you are someone who is aware that this is lingering, it's certainly worth looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're pointing to is, if there's some kind of emotional response when it comes to food or your relationship with food, there's something to look at, because it's ultimately just nourishment and fuel for our bodies, and there just isn't, it shouldn't be those things attached to it. And I think one way to kind of spot that is just really tuning into the language that you use around food. And Nat touched on this just before, but speaking about food as good or bad is to me a bit of a red flag that the relationship needs realigning, because there isn't any morality with food. I mean, I think there is morality with farming practices and agricultural practices which impact food quality just from a physiological point of view, sure. But other than that, it's just food, and there's food that has a particular effect in your body, and sometimes those effects are undesirable. And we might call the food bad for that, but it's just an undesirable effect, or an effect that is not in alignment with our goals, or perhaps our health, for example. But I do think, just be very mindful. I think a big red flag is when you make your diet your personality.
Yeah,
I mean,
at times.
yeah, but I could make some bad jokes here and I shall refrain, but we've all seen people online who've got, I'm not picking on this person. I actually, if I had to label myself something, I would say I am a plant-based omnivore, but you've got, carnivore or keto or vegan or fruitarian or whatever, and it's their entire personality in their account. I mean, that is honestly concerning as a health professional when I see that. So if you're starting to really identify with the way that you eat and you're kind of merging it with who you are, that's a problem, because The truth is, our health needs change all of the time, different seasons and chapters of our life. And so your requirements might be different. Now, I have absolutely seen, I'm sure you have too, Nat, people go on an extreme eating program, whether it's like carnivore or lion or whatever they're calling it these days, or vegan or vegetarian. And for many reasons, sometimes really obvious ones, people might feel better initially, or they might not. Kind of luck of the draw. If they do feel better initially, they want to keep doing the same. And what we do see, I mean, probably see it more with keto and carnivore because there's just so many more people doing it, is they might initially feel good, red flag for gut immune health problems and digestive issues if you need to eat that way to feel good, and please get that fixed up. But to be honest, like those things are unsustainable and they work until they don't. And we're seeing it, there's far more than you realize. But I can tell you, every person I've follow on Instagram who was a vegan isn't a vegan anymore. And this is, I'm not picking on vegans, but what I can tell you is half of them have been open and honest about that. And one in particular, I know for a fact, still cosplays as a vegan online because that's how they've built their business and how they sell products, and they eat animal protein. And by the same token, I mean, God, the debacle with the Liver King, who was, actually on steroids, is the perhaps there's a whole other level of self-deception. But Dr. Paul Saladino, and I'm not picking on him, he's been very open about this. He was the carnivore MD, and he was a big proponent of the carnivore, and it worked for him until it didn't. And I think I just high five you, Paul. Not that you'll ever see or listen to this, but very proud of you for having the integrity. And I've seen plenty of other practitioners and people do this too. They're actually just saying, you know what, it stopped working for me, and I've now suffered the consequences, and I'm now trying to navigate my way out of it. But people are so keen on a quick fix. They want a one size fits for all. I get it. It can be so complex and it's annoying, and it would be nice just to have, here's the plan. But the truth is, you just have to actually work with someone, really, I think, who is willing to be open, who understands its nuance, who can meet you where you're at and help you take you where you want to go, and guide you gently and kindly to find what really works for you based on truth, based on real facts, and also what's truly right for your body according to your own biometrics, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's like such good points there, and I agree. I think it's incredibly courageous for people who have really put it out there of, having a very strong messaging about something and then being brave enough and having enough integrity to say, hey, you know what, this is not working for me. And I guess reverse engineering that, I can imagine that that does make it a lot harder to step out of a particular way of eating if it does stop working for you, if you have made it your identity. So it's certainly not like wrong or harmful to be passionate about and excited about finding a way of nourishing yourself that is really resonating with you, that's really feeling in alignment for you, that is really working. But I think that having your whole sense of self and whole sense of belonging and value in the world being because you're doing such a thing, I think it just makes it a much slipperier slope to then be able to really truly listen to your body if there comes a time where that's not true. And so I think just, yeah, it's not easy, and I also think it's, to a degree, human nature to want to have things feel simple, to feel like we belong somewhere, to have a lot of certainty in what we're doing, because it's it builds confidence, and there's less decision fatigue if those decisions feel very simple and black and white. And also there's a way of having a confidence around the way that you nourish your body that doesn't necessarily have to have the dogma and the confined identity with it as well. So
That's a good
yeah,
point. I think you're right. It comes down to, are you feeling stuck in it, and are you judging yourself for wanting to make changes, or do you fear, are you going to judge yourself if you do anything differently? And I think even that is just that internal decision to shift that mindset must be really hard. I mean, I'm guessing it's probably one of the hardest parts about changing what you're doing. And I wish I had more to contribute here. I feel so blessed to not have had an experience myself with, I mean, apart from eating rice cakes as a teenager, but that wasn't like an internalized personality. There was no moral thing. It was just I latched on to low fat as good and went like to refined carbs. So love that for me. And also, I have plenty of my own other problems, by the way, but in terms of direct experience with a tricky relationship with food, I would love to, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, Nat, is with your journey that you had, which I know was, a Herculean one. What worked for you in your past, if you can cast your mind back to how you started to uncouple yourself from having this fear around food and having a disordered relationship with, the stuff that literally keeps us alive and helps us heal, to getting to where you are now, where I mean, it's just night and day. I can't even really imagine that version of you, given how enthusiastic you are as far as eating goes, and how much you just enjoy. I mean, obviously, you're a meal prep ninja, and you're so intentional about what you put in your body because, we know we want to feel good, and that's why we do what we do. But how do you get from where you were to where you are now today?
with a lot of therapy, guys, a lot of therapy. No, that I'm half joking. I'm not really joking. I definitely think that therapy really helped me because I would say at least my initial disordered eating, like when I had anorexia, it was definitely about finding something to control. And there was more layers to it than that. I've done an episode on my experience with my eating disorder in the past. So if you're really interested in that topic, you can go and search for that and have a bit of a listen. But yeah, so outside of the real like depth of it, of like really going in and addressing the underlying drivers of why it's manifesting in through the relationship with food, I'd say some other like practical things that I have done at various times is that I think initially my fear was around just purely eating, like eating enough food. And I remember weighing and measuring and calculating absolutely everything. And I certainly know there are some people that can relate to that. And I think something that I often get people to do if they do fit into that camp and they are someone who weighs, measures, tracks everything is like absolutely not to just go, all right, I'm just going to throw my kitchen scales out and I'm just going to go cold turkey. The level of anxiety that I felt when someone even suggested that to do that to me back then was outrageous, and it has an opposite effect, and I think also can sometimes trigger people into the opposite, in terms of binge eating as well. So I think a better approach with that, and then we can also extrapolate that onto other examples as well, but I think one approach with that is just starting to weigh a couple of less things. So usually where I start with people if they're in that situation is I say, okay, like still weigh and track everything as you normally would, but just start to not weigh and measure your vegetables. And that usually is something that feels actually still really stretchy for people, but doable. And then once you're like, okay, I didn't die, like nothing dramatic changed, know that I can do this, you can then move on to the next thing. So I usually do it in that way for people, and that certainly helped me in the past build some confidence and less anxiety, because otherwise I honestly used to take my kitchen scales everywhere with me. Like, I'm not even kidding you. There was no place that I did not take them. If I was going to a friend's house, if I was going out to dinner at a restaurant, if I was going like on a holiday, and I would not consume something if I couldn't weigh it. So that's the degree that it can occur for people, and certainly did for me. So I guess that relates a little bit more to food volume generally, in the sense of other things. So, maybe it's like fruit, for example, or carbs, or it's dairy, or it's whatever it might be, gluten, if you're someone where you do actually tolerate that, fine, and you don't need to avoid it strictly. I would probably borrow a bit of a strategy that is similar to like cognitive behavioral therapy principles. So I guess in that kind of sense, an example of how you can do it, and definitely I followed a similar approach without necessarily realizing that it was CBT related, but first just like identifying the fear that's coming up. So maybe you are at a friend's house and it is time to have, I don't know, an afternoon snack or dinner or something, and you can see that there's a big serve of carbohydrates there or there's a salad that's got cheese all through it, and whatever you're not eating, let's say, carbs or dairy, whatever it might be, just bring awareness to the fact that your thought or your fear is that if I eat this, it's going to mean whatever. If I eat if I eat carbs at dinner, I'm going to gain weight. Or if I eat dairy, my body's going to be inflamed. These are all untrue statements, by the way, but very common things for people to think. And then try and stay in your body in that and identify how is that making me feel? Is there a knot in my stomach? Am I feeling anxious? Do I feel like my chest is tight and I'm feeling that sense of like panic? Is my heart beating faster? Am I feeling guilty? It's not to, and only do that and be with your emotions if you feel like you can. If you can't, that's okay. But it is a good thing to try and get used to creating space for them, and just picturing yourself sitting alongside them. Because I often used to find, and again, like work with a therapist on this, but I'm just sharing my personal experience, that whenever I tried to run away from something, it just grew bigger. Whereas when I did some work around actually sitting with my feelings, allowing them to be there, describing them, and trying not to suppress them, I did find that it became less big and less all-consuming. So that's the first step that I would say, and then you can kind of then move on to that step of challenging the thought. So, and this is all obviously happening in your head at this, dinner party hypothesis. So maybe you're like, okay, is this actually really true? And what evidence do I have to support this? And also, is there any evidence that I can think of that actually goes against what I'm saying? And you can go into that. I also think that then moving on from that is kind of finding the middle ground and going, well, can I find a way to have more of a balanced thought around this? So perhaps it's, well, eating a small amount of carbohydrate at my dinner meal is not actually going to create any big change, and in fact I might just enjoy it. So a bit of like a middle ground. And I guess in that, just what helped for me with a lot of these things is just starting with really tiny exposures to it. So you don't have to, for example, if your fear is around eating fruit because you think it's sugar and it's bad for you or whatever it might be, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, okay, you go from that to having a huge fruit salad every day. It might be that you go from that to just incorporating a piece of fruit throughout your day as a snack or after dinner, whatever it might be. Similar with dairy, similar with other foods that you might have some fear around. And then I think a really important part that also used to help me, and I used to try and practice this as often as I could with anything, and I do this generally with anything I'm fearful of as well, by the way, is after doing said behavior that you're fearful of, have a reflection and reinforce what you've learnt from that, in the sense that, hey, I ate that, I survived, nothing bad happened, and I'm so proud of myself for leaning into that fear and discomfort and following through and allowing myself to challenge that anyway. Because that last part, I think, not being a qualified therapist, is what really helps you build evidence and self confidence and self trust to go, hey, when I have that same emotion, fear, anxiety, guilt, shame, around this food, or I'm sure you can apply it to other circumstances, that that doesn't mean I can't challenge it and overcome it and get to a different place. It's, and unfortunately, the only way through it, or to the other side, is to practice. But I do think, this all exists on a spectrum. And what I mean by that is there are some food fears, there are some things that absolutely, just listening to this episode, hearing some of the strategies, trying them out for yourself, may be enough for you. But there are situations where it's probably much more supportive, effective, safe to go through that process in a supported way, because I think we all have a different capacity for regulating our own nervous system and moving through overwhelming feelings. And if you don't feel like you currently have the resources to do that, I think it's really helpful to have that facilitated, to learn that skill and then take it out in the world yourself, and I guess face some of those feelings around food or other things.
Such great starting points, Nat. And I think if anyone's, at the beginning of their journey with this, or even if you're in the messy middle, there's so much gold in what you've just shared. And I think overarchingly, I think, we can't solve a problem like this in a podcast episode, much like the other things we talk about, but especially this, because it's so much a tangled web of emotion and, difficult feelings and anxieties and, playing out in the realm of food. And to be honest, I feel like this must be one of the hardest things to have an issue with. I was talking to a client the other day about addiction, and not that we're talking about food addiction here, it's kind of perhaps the opposite of that, but anything else like alcohol, gambling, whatever it is, drugs, compulsive shopping, like unnecessary for life, right? But food is necessary for life. You have to confront this every day, multiple times a day, and you're kind of forced to come face to face with, or really be impacted by, whatever's going on underneath every time you approach your plate and your knife and fork. And I think that is so challenging, and I think it's also probably quite draining as well. There's no way of avoiding this as an ongoing daily experience, because food is required for life. You can only get away without eating for so long before things start to break down. So we really just want to honor where you're at. If you've made it all the way to the end of this episode, we appreciate you listening. And also, if you are in the middle of this and trying to navigate your way out, please know many people have walked the path before you, and there are many ways out that you can consider. But I think really the main takeaway from today is that this isn't something you want to try and muscle through on your own. Getting professional support from both a nutritional perspective and also a psychological health perspective are going to be a dream team, so to speak, in order to really help you heal whatever wounds you've got going on internally that ultimately are expressing themselves in the form of an unhealed relationship with food. And we are both sending you so much love, and Nat truly is someone who's walked this path with, the broadest experience from every element. I mean, there just isn't anything she doesn't know about the subject other than being a therapist. So if you are struggling with this, I would encourage you to reach out to her. And if it's not her, please reach out to someone who has experience in this area and who can also connect you with someone who has experience supporting people psychologically in this area too.
Absolutely. All right, friends. Well, cheers. Go, whatever your next meal is, whatever your next snack is, I would love to invite you to think about three amazing things about that food or that meal. And I think that also is a beautiful practice to just remember that, for every quote unquote thing that you could find wrong with a food, there's also so many benefits. And I think it's a really beautiful practice to be grateful, to focus on the benefits, the joy, the privilege, the nourishment, and no, it's not necessarily a fix to the whole problem, but all these little things add up. So thank you for being with us, and we will see you again next week.
Bye, friends.